Welcome to Quid Pros Quo, where creativity meets academia. Here, we're all about leveraging our love of academia to improve both your creative writing practice and ours. Whether you're honing your craft or just beginning your writing journey, we're here to share scholarly insights, inspiration, and advice that benefits us all. Let's get started.
Hi, and welcome to Quid Pros Quo. I'm Zach.
And I'm Rin.
And today we are beginning our Politics of Speculative Fiction series. I have been really excited to talk about this. I have been doing so much reading and so much writing about this topic, and we are about to get into it. This is going to be a pretty hefty series, so buckle up, folks.
Yeah, I think we have like 6 episodes lined up at least.
Maybe. Yep. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then 6 for the round table.
Yeah. Okay. It's going to be great. And Zach has been working so hard to get these notes put together. And let me tell you, folks, he's going to shine in this series. This is going to be so good. I'm so excited. Let's talk about why we're doing this series.
I'm so glad you brought that up.
Yeah. Do you want to go and do it first, or should I?
I would say that yes, I will say something.
Okay.
I would say part of the reason why we're doing this now is because there is a lot of rumblings inside of the book spaces that we're a part of about whether books and reading ought to be or are inherently political. And I think part of that is that there is a frustration and an exhaustion with how much effort it takes to be a part of the world. Whether that, regardless of your political affiliation and regardless of the kind of media you consume, it's kind of everywhere. Where, if you go and see a summer blockbuster, you have a kind of weird parable about violence inside of the Middle East and in Ukraine at the same time. I'm talking about Superman, by the way. And you just can't get away from it. It's everywhere. And I feel like a lot of people have been talking about that on the internet these days.
For sure. And it's like a lot of people like to read for escapism, which I get. That's a major reason why I read. But I feel like you still have to recognize that books are inherently political. We'll get into why books are inherently political in a moment, and a lot of it has to do with access to information. But you can't read and not understand that even choosing to say nothing is choosing to say something. Authors are always saying something in their works, regardless of how intentional it is. As authors, our own prejudices and ideas seep into our writing because they're a part of us.
Yeah, absolutely.
Let's also talk about what the series is not. It is not a series about designing political systems for world building. We did a similar episode to that way back in the world building series in the first 100 episodes. So we're not talking about how to build a political system. We are talking about how politics intersect with what is written and published and how the publishing industry mediates that effect.
Yeah, I think that with a series like this, it's helpful to start with definitions. So I wanted to throw out 2 important things, but they're both related to our primary definition for the series, and that is, what is politics? And I feel like one of the things that people are often talking about when they're talking about politics is that they're talking about how so much of our culture is taken up by arguments about what it means to live a good life and what the good life looks like. And that's partly because of the way that politics began to be redefined in the 70s and 80s with some of the campus protest movements and second wave feminism. And so kind of the working definition that we're going to use for politics is that politics is the arguments about how to organize public life. This is a definition that is informed by my experience teaching and reading introductory political science for 3+ years. And when we're talking about public life, we're talking about life that is shared by multiple people. So, individual hobbies or pursuits that happen, on your own are not not an aspect of politics. Now, where the politics comes in is where it's like, where do you get your yarn for your crochet projects? Are you purchasing it from Michaels or from somebody else? There can be politics there, but you have to have the public life component, but you also need to have an argument. If there's no argument about some facet of political life, that's just commonly accepted culture.
For sure. So, and let's get right into the episode. In the context of this episode, there's been a debate on social media about reading and writing being political. This is especially prominent on everyone's favorite social media platform for books, Book Talk. Ooh. It's also all over Instagram and Twitter and anywhere people read books, they're having and talk about it on the internet, they're having this argument. Where one side of Book Talk says reading shouldn't be political, we should keep politics out of a book, and the other side says all reading is political. From what we've said in this episode and what we're about to say, you can guess which camp we fall into.
Yes. However, we are going to add some nuance to it because, what you miss when you go onto the internet is nuance. And that's why you came to our corner of the internet, was so that you could get nuance.
Yes, snaps all around. So, as I mentioned earlier, we believe reading is political because literacy democratizes access to information. The kind of books that are available in a society have the effect circumscribing the limits of what is possible, what creates new possibilities for public life, and inspires argument. So, if you have, this is goes also into the representation, argument. I'm putting that in air quotes, but where, story time. I just moved to a small town in Idaho because I have a lot of family here. And I'm looking for a job up here. And I told my mom, I'm like, yeah, I want to look at the libraries because I would love to work at a library. I view them as community centers. They're really important. And she says, okay, yeah, that's a good idea for you because you'd be really good at that. But don't go to small town public library. They're a book banning library. So you should go into the major city and go into those libraries. And it's going to be a longer commute, but you'll be happier because at book banning places, they, for one reason or another, and we'll talk about this more in a sec, they want to not publicize the representation that's in the books of whatever that representation may be. Often right now, it's queer literature. It's often things going about teenage adolescent sexuality, or it's critiques on the patriarchy, all these things. If it does not fit in a Christian mindset, it is probably liable to get banned.
Yeah, I'm just like what Rin said with reading. When people can read, it means that there are many more opportunities to find information. And because of that, it can lead to arguments about things that have long been considered settled. Much of the angst from conservatives inside of the United States right now, my interpretation, is that people are frustrated by how many things that they thought were, obvious and didn't need to be argued that are now really hotly debated. And because they're uncomfortable with that, some people are not willing to engage. One of the things that we wanted to talk about is that because reading has such a big impact on the kinds of possibilities that people can imagine and the kinds of realities that people work towards, that people and institutions have incentives to restrict access to information generally, but also books specifically, in order to protect the status quo. Because I'm a huge nerd, we're going to go all the way back to antiquity, and we're going to bring up our favorite philosopher, Plato. I don't actually particularly like Plato. I think Sandel...
is he our favorite?
No. I personally think Michael Sandel has a lot more interesting philosophy, but that's for another episode. Plato wrote this book called The Republic, and in The Republic, he puts forward some tenets of political theory that if you've taken a government class at any time in your life, you may have heard of some of these. But one of the things that Plato and his contemporaries thought about was what the purpose is of a government, or in other words, what is the purpose of the state? Not like a state within the United States, but like a state, talking about more like a country or a government. And the answer that they had was that the purpose of the state is to promote the virtue of citizens. And if that was the purpose of the state, then it followed that the state ought to restrict books so that only those books which promote virtue are allowed inside of the society. And this is not, me reading between the lines. Plato actually said that there should be censors and that they should go through and they should, cull out all of the stories that, lead people to lead immoral, non-virtuous life. And this is, going back to Rin's comment about book banning, this is part of the rationale behind book banning. If, for example, adolescent sexuality is immoral and the state's purpose is to promote virtue, then it makes sense for the state to use its power to ban books which depict adolescent sexuality as anything but immoral. Now, you can absolutely disagree with the premises of the argument. Maybe you don't think that the purpose of the state is to promote virtue, or maybe you don't think adolescent sexuality is immoral. Either way, the logical construction of the argument, that all follows. It's where we're arguing about premises. And that's part of the reason why reading is so political, is because of that tension in between access to information and control of information that people and institutions want to be able to control to preserve the status quo. We're not just talking about dictators or Moms for Liberty. We're also talking about the class that controls the production and or publication of books, which we are often referred to as the literati. And they can also engage in these kind of restrictions.
And I think it's important to note that, I mean, you covered it pretty well, but like when we're dealing with premises, it's like we have to separate our own like gut reaction to the premise to like the logic of the argument. Mm-hmm. Because that's something, like, personally, I know I have a hard time with that because I'm like, why would you think XYZ is immoral? Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. They're just normal human people doing normal human people things.
For sure.
But, yeah, it's...
Well, and reading can be a really powerful way that people engage with their premises.
Yes.
I mean, one of the things that I have noticed is that when I'm having a difficult time talking to somebody about some X, Y, or Z political issue, when I ground it inside of a story about somebody's lived experience, it becomes a lot easier for people to understand. Yes. And I have found in my own life, the more familiarity that I get with stories about people who are dealing with different topics or different issues inside of society, that often leads to me changing my mind about how things ought to be and reevaluate my premises.
Right. We are going to get political in this series, as we do. We're not going to get too, I think, contemporarily political, but I will make an exception to this because in my personal life, as like a trans non-binary person, I get a lot of people who say like really questionable things to me about like before they realize that I'm a trans non-binary person. Because if you've looked at my Instagram, you know what I look like. I don't follow conventional standards for people who are assigned female at birth. When people don't realize that I'm trans, they'll say like a really transphobic thing to me, and then I'll have to be like, well, actually, here's my lived experience. And when they actually get to have a conversation with the trans person, they're like, oh, trans people are not the devil incarnate, actually. Which
Imagine that.
Imagine that. And like, similarly, stories let us engage with ideas and premises that maybe we wouldn't get to engage with otherwise. And those can be like real life stories, like of, people experiencing genocide is another topical example.
Yeah.
But like, or whether it's a fictional story that deals with these real life problems. And that is what our next topic is, because often when authors argue about the political value of books, they're talking about expanding the limits of what is possible, or they're critiquing the status quo. When they write a story, they have something they want to say about society, and they're trying to advance an argument about how public life ought to be organized through their writing, through their stories. And this could be implicit or explicit, meaning it could be like a metaphor, it could be Animal Farm, or it could be Fahrenheit 451.
Yep.
So, which,
two
by
great
the way,
examples.
Which, by the way, I read Fahrenheit 451 for the first time last year, and I was blown away by how amazing it was. Like, obviously, like, Ray Bradbury is amazing, but I struggle with a lot of American classics because they're just so violently misogynistic most of the time.
Yeah.
And that kind of ruins it for me as someone who has just, like, been subjected to so much, like, toxic misogyny. But, like, and, like, yeah, it was kind of misogynistic, but it was so good. Like, I could look past the toxic misogyny, which is saying something for me, because anyways, you guys know me.
So Rin talked about this idea of making some sort of argument about how public life is supposed to be organized, and talked about implicit versus explicit claims. It is really difficult to create a narrative which does not touch on how public life is organized, because if you do that, you're not there isn't necessarily conflict because there's no argument, right? And because there's no argument, that's where there's no politics. And so that is where that's kind of where the space of I don't want political books lives in, where I am not looking for a critique about the organization of public life. But when you're not making a statement, it is a form of consenting to the status quo, which brings with it a whole host of potential issues.
It always makes me think of that Elie Wiesel quote. If you don't know who Elie Wiesel is, he is a Romanian-American writer who survived the Holocaust. And he has this quote about silence. It says, "We must always take sides. Neutrality helps the oppressor, never the victim. Silence encourages the tormentor, never the tormented." So if you are not purposefully taking a side in your writing as like an author, you're not taking a side, and that's usually the wrong side to take.
Right. Along with that, I think it's important to remember that all stories, it would be a mistake to think that all stories must address all aspects of public life, because, I mean, it doesn't give you much way to actually say anything coherent in the first place. But second of all, it would probably lead to burnout to try and throw all of that together. So you have these two truisms that you're navigating in between, and that you have to keep in mind as an author, that you do have to take sides. Sometimes it's a binary, but more often, as in many things in life, there are gradations, right? Where you can
Love
be like
me a spectrum.
Yeah, right. Where you can say, I'm closer to this person than that person on this issue, but I think that these people are missing out on this aspect, or whatever the case may be.
Nuance. Again, we love nuance at Quid Pros Quo.
Yes. So we've made the case that reading and writing are political. Now, the thing that we want to add to the conversation that is often not addressed inside of, flame wars on the internet is that not all books are political to the same degree, and that political value varies from book to book. So we're about to do another definition. What does it mean to have political value? For me, when I think about political value, I am thinking about the degree to which a book inspires the reader to do something. And I want to emphasize the doing part of it. It is an active thing. It is not thinking differently. It's not, it's not imagining things differently. It is an actual action. The reason why this is the way that I think about the political value of books, in large part has to do with the philosophy of David Graeber, who is one of my favorite anthropologists, actually my favorite anthropologist, because I do not have a pantheon of anthropologists. It's just Graeber. Because my wife knows how much I love David Graeber, she got me a collection of his essays a little while ago for Father's Day. And the title of the collection is The Ultimate Hidden Truth of the World. And the ultimate hidden truth of the world, it tells you inside of the introduction, is that the world is what we make it, and we can just as easily choose something else. So kind of my thought process, inspired by Graeber, is that social reality and the way that the world works is created by what we do. And what we do, if we decide to change it, changes social reality and public life. Therefore, if a book inspires you to do something, it changes social reality and therefore has political value.
For sure. And the books can inspire you, like what we're saying is it can inspire you to different degrees. And some books don't inspire you to do much. I have a hard time believing that, like, really trendy romantasy, like, and I love romantasy, don't get me wrong. I write romantasy, but, like, I just don't see anyone doing anything politically, like, valuable after reading Fourth Wing. Like, whereas when I read, like, Fahrenheit 451, I was like, yeah, I've got to read more banned books. I've got to, like, be more educated. Like, it inspired me to take action, in a way that, you know, most of the escapist literature, I have the hiccups. It inspired me to take action in a way that most of the escapist literature I read doesn't. So things like romantasy or monster smut or all these other various books, and it's not only romance. I realize I'm only citing romance examples. Other books, I've also read sci-fis that have low political value, and yes. Let me tell you, I love a man who tells me that sci-fi is the peak of all genres. And then I just have a lot of opinions about men telling me things, actually. Especially about books, because I know so much about books. I have a podcast where I talk about books. Hi, welcome to Quid Pros Quo.
Love it.
But things like... I lost where I am in the notes.
That's okay. I really liked what you were saying about gradations of action and different kinds of action. When I was thinking about different levels of political value, one of the things that I thought about was imitation. Like, imitation can be a form of, has political weight to it. And also sometimes people will use imagery from books in order to, critique their society. So a really, salient example is that a lot of protesters used imagery from The Handmaid's Tale by Margaret Atwood in order to protest the Dobbs v. Jackson decision inside the United States, which is when the Supreme Court reversed Roe v. Wade. You also have people using some of the imagery and language of Orwell's 1984 in order to talk about the increasing role of surveillance inside of modern life. Just like we talked about, with those low political value books, they're not inspiring people to do anything. I think that, I do think that the book talk girlies, the romantasy girlies, have something to say when they point out that smut often invites conversations about social norms around sexuality and what is and what isn't acceptable. So in that respect, I think that there can be political value as far as that is concerned.
Absolutely.
So again, it's all gradations. I have a little note in here. I just can't let go of Twilight because I love hating it. Twilight has political value because of its impact on paranormal romance, but also because of how its focus on the interior life of a teenage girl drove people to include more of those perspectives in their literature, which is important, even though Twilight has super problematic messaging about many, many elements of public life, okay? My wonderful wife is currently reading Why We Love and Hate Twilight by Sarah Gallagher. So I recommend that you look that up if you want to learn more about the super problematic parts of Twilight, because they are numerous.
For sure. I also want to point out that, like, in addition to, like, varying political value in a book, the political value is not absolute to each person. At some times, or to some people, a book may have, like, very low political value, but to another person, it may have super high political value. Like, and to, like, I'm thinking about Aristotle and Dante discovered the secrets of the universe, but I think it's Benjamin Elias Sanchez, maybe? Yeah, okay, that sounds right. If I'm wrong, I'll put it in the show notes. But when I read it as, like, a baby queer, it, like, inspired me to, like, be more authentic to myself and to, like, continue on my journey of coming out. It was, like, the first, like, queer book I really remember reading. Whereas, like I had read books with queer characters, but that was the first queer book I read. But I think if I were to read it now, it would have far lower, like, political value to me because I'm at a different spot in my journey and I know some things about the author that are maybe not super great. The political value is not absolute and it's going to change. It's going to shift over time. Because, like, in our society right now, again, Fahrenheit 451, my favorite book for this episode, is so relevant right now with book banning and, like, I see isolated cases of, like, conservative people going to, like, little free libraries and finding queer books and taking them out and burning them. Or, like...
Whoa!
I've seen,
my gosh!
But, like, I've seen, like, 2 or 3, like, people on threads, like, arguing with conservative people that, like, you shouldn't do that. And then, like, I've seen other conservative people saying, I'm going to buy your book just so I can burn it. To an indie author. I'm like, you're still giving them money? But, like, that's, like, disrespectful. But, like, anyways... Threads is wild. Again, this is the internet, and it's not very much nuance. I don't know how true those stories are, so we'll grain of salt. But, like, Fahrenheit 451 is really relevant. If we were in a society that was not banning lots of books, and it was, like, more utopian, Fahrenheit 451 would probably have lower political value than it does right now. So... just a note on the lack of absolution in... Absolutionism means something else. Absolute values in this stuff.
Yeah, I love how you pointed that out, because I think one of the wonderful things about literature is that it can mean different things to different people at different times in their life. To take a perhaps non-political example... my wife and I just read or did the audiobook of Mrs. Frisbee and the Rats of Nim, which is a book that I read, or that my dad read to me when I was, yay big. And, back then I was just like, oh, this is a really cute, this is a cute book. Reading it again at 25 was interesting to me because it was... it taught me a lot about atmosphere and a lot about, some of the finer elements of writing that I often am not paying attention to. And so it had a different value for me, when I read it last week versus when I read it, 11 plus years ago. No, that was too short. Would have been closer to like 14 years ago.
Sure.
Same with the political value.
Yeah, absolutely. And one more thing, because I can't let go. It's very important to me that people know I'm not against romance or romantasy. I love a romance and a romantasy book. I just want to talk. I know we're coming up on time. We've been going for 31 minutes in raw footage. But, like, people love to hate on romance. And, like, I saw this really good quote. It's like, sometimes you have to protect something that you think is annoying from something you know is dangerous. And I was like, you know what? So true. I do not vibe with, like, dark romance. But it's a really important tool for a lot of women to heal from sexual assault. Is, like, how it's viewed in those circles. But, like, the men who hate on women and, like, verbally abuse women for liking dark romance, I will protect the dark romance girlies with my life because I know that man is more dangerous than they are.
Right.
And it's not always a man. It could be other people. It could be a bear.
The bear's not coming for the books, though.
Yeah, literally, exactly. It's not always a man. Sometimes it's another woman, but like, I'm very much girls protect girls and so on and so forth. But like, don't you dare take my earlier words in the episode as me taking romantasy as my first thought of like low political value. Because I think romance does have can have really high political value. And again, it's different for different people. So for like a cishet man who is maybe more on the conservative side of the American political spectrum, not very much value in like a queer romance book. For a woman exploring her sexuality, that queer romance book could mean the world to her.
Right.
So, yeah. Anyways, I'll get off my soapbox. Let's give them their homework.
Yes. So, here's your homework for this episode. Using the definitions of politics and political value that we discussed inside of this episode, we would like to invite you to analyze one of the books that you like for its political content. So, what is it saying about how public life ought to be organized, either implicitly or explicitly? And what does it inspire readers to do as a result of that argument? We want to hear from you, and we would love to share your responses at the beginning of the next episode.
Right. So the way you contact us is you can leave comments. I believe you can leave comments on YouTube and Spotify and maybe Apple Music. I don't know. But definitely YouTube and Spotify as long as I press the publish button on YouTube, which I think I have. I don't know. Fingers crossed. I'll check after this episode, after we finish recording. Or you can email us at quidprosquo@gmail.com. Name of the podcast @gmail.com. Yeah, thank you so much for joining us for what is probably a longer episode. We'll see how much I can edit it down, but this was a blast. We'll see you next week on Quid Pros Quo.
Quid Pros Quo is hosted by DC Winters and CK Jensen. If you liked this episode, please subscribe and leave us a rating on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts. If you'd like to contact us, you can email us at quidprosquo@gmail.com. Thank you for joining us today.